Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into a world of candlelit bedrooms, shadowy corridors, and the peculiar trials of sleepless Victorians. You picture yourself in a London townhouse. The fire burned low, wax dripping lazily down a brass candlestick. The curtains are drawn, the room thick with warmth and dust, and yet your mind refuses to slow. Your body aches for rest, but the harder you chase it, the further away it scurries. You might think you do fine in this era. Just lie down, shut your eyes, and eventually drift off. But trust me, you probably wouldn't survive 1 week of Victorian insomnia cures without either becoming addicted to something or utterly bored to tears. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop your location and local time down in the comments. I love knowing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle deeper into the flickering glow of a Victorian bedroom. The walls are wallpapered with dizzying floral patterns. Every rose and ivy vine watching you from the shadows. The heavy wooden furniture creaks as you sit, and the mattress sighs under your weight. There's something cozy but also suffocating about this room. The Victorians believed good sleep demanded control of the environment, and they took this to extremes. Curtains weren't just drapes. They were fortresses against light and noise, and most importantly, the dreaded night air. Doctors backed and swore that the nighttime breeze carried disease straight into your lungs. So the cure was simple. Seal yourself in. Of course. That meant you'd often end up sweating like a boiled potato. But comfort was negotiable when superstition was on the line. You glance at the small table by the bed. A dozen little bottles glint in the candlelight, each promising relief. Tonics, tinctures, syrups, powders. Some are labeled with elegant calligraphy for restful slumber, while others hide their ingredients altogether. You don't know whether you're about to sip lavender or straight up laudanum, but you're too tired to care. That was a Victorian gamble. Every cure came with a question mark. Historians still argue whether sleeplessness was more a medical issue or a moral failing in that era. Was it your nerves, your digestion, your character, or simply the devil keeping you awake? Depending on which doctor you ask, you could be treated for all four. The soundscape of the night is strange, without electric buzz or hum. The quiet is heavy, broken only by the tick of the clock on the mantel. Each second feels louder the more you notice it. You lie back on the pillow. Goose down if you were wealthy, straw if you weren't, and try to focus on a faint glow of the candle dancing against the ceiling. There's a superstition in the air. Never fall asleep with the flames still burning, or you might never wake at all. Fires were common hazards, and plenty of houses went up in smoke thanks to one restless hand knocking over a candlestick. The sheets are stiff with starch, the nightshirt scratchy against your skin. Your body squirms, the room too hot, your thoughts too restless. The Victorians wrote endlessly in their diaries about this nightly battle. Men and women confess their struggles with the horrors of sleeplessness, describing how hours in bed stretched into eternities. Some even believed insomnia was a punishment for sin, proof that the conscience, not the body, was keeping them awake. Others blamed the Industrial Revolution itself. The relentless hum of factories, the artificial rhythm of gaslights, the stress of society sprinting toward modernity. You might smile at that idea now, but think about your own late nights scrolling a glowing screen. You're not so different. On the mantel sits a pocket Bible, its pages worn from nightly use. Families often recommended reciting passages until the mind dulled enough to surrender. If you weren't religious, you might resort to the equally riveting pastime of rereading the day's newspaper. Nothing puts you to sleep quite like another report on railway timetables or grain tariffs. Some Victorians swore by poetry too, but not the exciting kind. Epic verses about agriculture or deeply moral odes were considered the perfect lullabies for grown-ups. As the hours drag on, you start to notice how fragile the room feels. The candlelight throws shapes into the corners. The wallpaper blossoms seem to twitch in the shadows. The Victorians were terrified of nighttime hallucinations, visions caused by exhaustion. They wrote about staring into the dark until shapes became figures, until silence became whispers. Some called it the work of spirits, others the nervous mind playing cruel tricks. Either way, the result was the same, even less sleep. You shift again on the mattress, thinking maybe a different position will help. On your back, too stiff. On your side, your arm falls asleep before you do. On your stomach, you remember some physician warning that it would compress your lungs and suffocate you. No matter how you lie, you can't win. In the next room, you imagine the rest of the household also restless. Servants pacing with chamber pots. Children coughing in the night. A neighbor's horse stamping in the stable outside. In a world before white noise machines, every creak, every draft, every muffled thump became a reason to stay awake. And so the first part of the battle was always the same. Try to convince yourself that sleep would eventually arrive, if only you didn't chase it too hard. Of course, the harder you tried, the more awake you felt. Some things never change. The candle sputters as if mocking you, its flame shrinking. You blow it out, finally surrendering to the thick velvet dark. And there you are, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, your thoughts chasing themselves in circles. Welcome to the first long night of Victorian Insomnia. You're still there, tangled in stiff sheets, staring into the dark when your gaze drifts back to the bedside table. Those bottles and powders you noticed earlier seem to call out with promises of calm. Each one looks elegant enough to inspire confidence, but in truth, they're more like a gambling glass. You pick up a small vial labeled Compound Spirits of Lavender. Sounds gentle, right? But it's mostly alcohol with a whisper of floral perfume. A few drops on the tongue, and you're not sure if you're calming your nerves or just getting tipsy. Either way, you feel it burn. Victorian doctors had an impressive imagination when it came to tonics. They'd mix bitters with iron, quinine, or chalk. Yes, actual chalk, and sell it as a digestive aid, because the popular theory was that sleeplessness came from the stomach misbehaving. If you couldn't sleep, maybe you'd eaten too much beef or too little bread, or the wrong balance of the two. Historians still argue whether this obsession with digestion reflected genuine science or just Victorian hypochondria. You sip one of those chalky mixes, and instead of sleep, you get the unsettling feeling of having swallowed a bit of plaster from the parlor wall. One particularly famous concoction was chloral hydrate, nicknamed knockout drops. Strong enough to render you blissfully unconscious, it was hailed as a miracle cure for sleeplessness. Of course, long-term use led to addiction, hallucinations, and sometimes an eternal nap of the most final kind. But details like that tended to be left off the advertisements. Quack doctors also swore by bromides, chemical salts said to quiet an excitable brain. Take too many, though, and your skin might break out in bizarre rashes. Imagine lying awake, scratching all night, still sleepless but now with a side of itching. You glance again at the bottles. Some are filled with brown syrup, so thick it clings to glass. Others hold fine powders that shimmer faintly in the candlelight. A dose of valerian root tincture smells like wet socks, but was marketed as a wonder drug for hysterical women. Spoiler, it didn't work any better for men either. Still, Victorians loved the ritual of dosing. You measure carefully, swallow bravely, and wait for the relief that rarely comes. And then there was laudanum, the heavy hitter, the celebrity of the nightstand. A potent cocktail of opium and alcohol, it was both respected and feared. Parents slipped it into children's mouths to hush nighttime cries, and writers like Coleridge and De Quincey confessed whole creative lives addicted to it. You wonder if your eyelids are heavy because it's working, or because you're halfway to becoming a character in a gothic novel. The irony? A little laudanum might knock you out, but too much would leave you wide awake, jittery, heart racing, trapped between sleep and nightmare. Doctors didn't just hand out bottles. They gave lectures, too. They'd say things like, "This tonic will fortify the nerves." But really, fortify meant dull, and nerves meant everything we don't understand. That's Victorian medicine for you. Mystery cloaked in certainty. You picture yourself nodding politely while your physician adjusts his spectacles and scribbles notes in his leather ledger. He insists you'll feel better by morning, though he himself likely hasn't slept in days. On the quirkier side, some patients swore by powdered lettuce seed. Yes, lettuce, dried, ground, and swallowed with water. Apparently, it had mild sedative properties, though not strong enough to knock out anything bigger than a rabbit. Others tried a mixture called sleeping drafts, secret recipes of sugar water mixed with traces of morphine. And still, there were those who insisted that plain bitter tonics, gentian root steeped in alcohol, were enough to tone the system into restful submission. You think of it as a Victorian version of a 3 a.m. infomercial. Guaranteed results, but only if you buy now. The more you experiment, the more you realize this is less about cure and more about ritual. You pour, you sip, you grimace at the taste. Bitter powders on the tongue leave you puckering like you've bitten into an unripe persimmon. Syrupy tonics coat your throat until you feel as though you've swallowed molasses. And still, the clock ticks on, the candle burns low, and your eyes remain stubbornly open. Your stomach begins to ache from the mixture of chalk and syrup. Doctors in this era love to recommend stomach bitters because they believe the gut was the true master of the body. Cleanse the stomach, calm the mind. They'd say, which is basically the 19th century way of telling you to drink kombucha and hope for the best. Historians still argue whether this obsession came from advances in anatomy or just a societal panic over the sheer volume of meat pies being consumed. As the candle sputters, you place the bottles back down. Their labels shine with a false promise, elegant fonts covering crude reality. Sleep doesn't arrive, but you do feel a little woozy, half from the alcohol, half from the knowledge that Victorians were desperate enough to swallow nearly anything for relief. You lie back and try to imagine, did anyone in all these centuries of tonics and tinctures truly fall asleep at once, or did they simply pass out, their bodies finally surrendering? Perhaps it didn't matter. In an age where science and superstition were cozy bedfellows, the important thing was that you felt as though you were doing something. You weren't just lying awake. You were fighting with bottle and spoon against the long Victorian night. You've managed to put the tonic bottles back in their place, your stomach grumbling faintly in protest, when your hand brushes against a small embroidered pouch tucked beneath the pillow. A lavender sachet. The scent slips out the moment you untie the ribbon, sweet and slightly dusty, like an old grandmother's wardrobe. Victorians swore by these. Bundles of herbs tucked into pillows, sewn into nightcaps or sprinkled on sheets. To coax sleep, you bring it closer to your face, inhale, and wonder whether it's calming your nerves or just making you sneeze. Herbal remedies were the great middle ground. Not as frightening as laudanum, not as laughable as powdered chalk. Lavender, chamomile, hops, and even roses were pressed into service. The logic was simple. If the plants looked gentle and smelled pleasant, surely they could soothe the restless. Historians still argue whether these herbs had genuine sedative effects or Victorians simply fell asleep out of boredom from sniffing dried leaves. Either way, the sachets became part of the bedtime ritual, a kind of olfactory placebo wrapped in lace. Chamomile was especially popular, often brewed into tea before bed. You sip a steaming cup, the taste soft and grassy, and almost feel lulled into calm. But then you remember Victorian brewing instructions often included tossing in extra ingredients like fennel or peppermint, just to strengthen the dose. The result? Something between tea and vegetable soup. Not exactly a lullaby in a cup. More peculiar was the use of hops, the same bitter flowers that give beer its punch. Victorians stuffed hop pillows under their heads, convinced the smell would sedate them. You imagine lying down with your nose buried in what smells suspiciously like a brewery floor. Effective or not, you'd probably dream of taverns rather than drifting through peaceful meadows. And then there were rose petals. Romantic? Yes. Practical? Not so much. Left too long, they grew moldy, giving the pillow a musty tang more likely to trigger a coughing fit than sweet dreams. Still, the Victorians adored the symbolism. Sleep was supposed to be pure, innocent, scented with virtue, and what better way to advertise it than with roses tucked under your chin? You picture the advertisements, ornate posters promising soothing slumber by herbal perfume. Housewives stitched sachets as gifts, apothecaries sold them in bulk, and children learned that if you couldn't sleep, sniffing flowers was a respectable thing to do. One quirky tidbit. Some families actually pinned sachets directly onto nightshirts, so you walk around smelling like a mobile garden. Romantic in theory, itchy in practice. The experience wasn't always serene. Strong herbal blends could get overwhelming, especially when mixed with other household smells. Coal fires, candle smoke, damp wool. Imagine drifting off under a pillow stuffed with hops, while the room itself smelled faintly of cabbage stew. Sleep becomes less about relaxation and more about endurance. Yet rituals have power. You tuck the lavender sachet under your cheek, whispering to yourself that this time it will work. And maybe it does. For a few moments your mind slows. You picture the fields where the herbs grew. Imagine workers harvesting under the sun, the bundles drying in shadowy barns. The story soothes you almost as much as the scent. And just as your eyelids flutter, your nose wrinkles, the sachet's musty undertone wins out, and you're back to wakefulness. Victorians weren't blind to the failures. That's why recipes kept evolving, shifting from lavender alone to elaborate blends. Chamomile plus valerian root, hops plus peppermint, roses plus lemon balm, an entire symphony of aromas meant to outwit insomnia. Doctors even advise experimenting. If lavender does not soothe, try hyssop or dill. Dill, the same herb you'd pickle cucumbers with, now tasked with lulling you into dreamland. You sigh, setting the sachet aside. Maybe it's you. Maybe your nerves are too sharp, your body too restless. Or maybe the Victorians were simply as sleepless as you are now, hiding their failures in polite diaries. Some wrote long confessions. I did not sleep until the birds were singing. Others grew poetic about hours wasted counting the silence. The truth is, the sachets were less about results and more about comfort, the small ritual of believing that sleep could be coaxed by nature itself. And so, you lie there, surrounded by scents that are part garden, part apothecary. The candle is nearly gone, the air heavy with perfume. You close your eyes again, whispering, this time. Whether it's the herbs or sheer exhaustion or the faint trick your brain plays when a ritual becomes routine, you finally feel that delicate tipping point. The edge of sleep, still fragile, always slipping just out of reach. The sachets are pushed aside now, their perfume lingering faintly in the air as you shift beneath the weight of those enormous Victorian curtains. They hang heavy and solemn, thick with dust, swallowing the window whole. You might expect a breeze to slip through the cracks, a cool draft to soothe you. But no, every fold has been nailed, tucked, and layered so tightly that not even moonlight dares to intrude. The room feels less like a bedroom and more like a velvet-lined coffin. Victorians loathed night air. Doctors warned endlessly that breezes carry disease, miasmas, vapors, invisible poisons floating in the dark. So windows were shut, curtains sealed, and rooms transformed into little fortresses of stale air. You inhale, and instead of freshness, you catch a cocktail of coal soot, candle smoke, and last night's boiled cabbage. Cozy, right? Historians still argue whether these fears were genuine medical caution or just another chapter of Victorian paranoia. Either way, the result was the same: airless nights where your lungs complained before your eyelids even drooped. Of course, thick curtains had another purpose. They blocked light from the new gas lamps lining the streets. Imagine your neighborhood suddenly ablaze with pale orange glow at all hours. Some people adored the progress. Others grumbled it ruined their natural rhythms. You try to picture yourself in 1850, lying in bed, while a flickering street lamp throws ghostly shadows across the wall. Curtains became both shield and prison, promising rest while suffocating comfort. You turn onto your side, feeling the humidity stick to your skin. Perspiration beads at your temples. This is the dark side of sealing up the night. Rooms got unbearably hot. Doctors prescribed plenty of blankets, but no draft. Yes, you were expected to bundle yourself in wool while marinating in still air. It's a Victorian version of cooking sous vide, except you're the chicken breast. On the quirkier end, some households place bowls of vinegar or camphor under the bed. The vapors, they believed, would cleanse the stagnant air. Instead, you're stuck inhaling what smells suspiciously like a pickle factory. Others sprinkled eau de cologne onto curtains, hoping the fragrance might distract from the stale atmosphere. You can imagine falling asleep halfway between a perfume shop and a cellar. Not everyone agreed. A small but stubborn camp of reformers argued that windows should be cracked open at night. fresh air allowed to flow. They were considered reckless radicals. Neighbors whispered, "Those people invite cholera into their homes." Yet, ironically, the ones daring to sleep with a breeze probably rested better than anyone else. Historians still debate whether this early fight over open windows was the start of modern sleep hygiene, or just luckier lungs. You shuffle restlessly. The oppressive air makes each breath a little heavier. Your shirt clings damply to your back. In desperation, you push the curtain aside for just a peek. Moonlight spills across the room, silvery and calm, the air cool against your face. It feels like rebellion, like sneaking a forbidden treat. You let the breeze wash over you, and for a brief moment, your body sighs with relief. But then paranoia creeps in. What if your neighbor's cough rides on the wind straight into your lungs? You quickly tug the curtain close, the velvet swallowing the light once more. The furniture around you seems complicit in the atmosphere. Upholstered chairs, thick carpets, tapestries, all traps for dust and heat. Even the wallpaper holds the day's warmth like a stubborn oven. And yet, people boasted of their bedrooms as symbols of wealth and propriety. A guest walking past would note the heavy drapes and nod. Clearly a family of good sense. Comfort was negotiable. Appearances were not. You roll over again, pillow damp, sheets twisted. Every attempt at sleep feels thwarted by the very precautions meant to encourage it. Too much air, you're unsafe. Too little, you're suffocating. Too much light, you're restless. Too much darkness, you're haunted by shapes and shadows. Victorian nights were a tightrope act of superstition and discomfort, balanced precariously on the hope that exhaustion might finally win. The curtains loom above you, silent and smug. You can almost hear them whisper, "Better sleepless than sick." You sigh, knowing that no herbal sachet, no tonic bottle, can change the simple fact that you are trapped inside a sealed jar of a bedroom. And still, the clock ticks on. Another long hour disappears into the airless night. Your thoughts wander back to bottles, but this time your attention fixes on one in particular, a small amber vial with a handwritten label that reads simply, "Laudanum, opium dissolved in alcohol, sweetened with just enough sugar or spice to fool the tongue." In the Victorian imagination, this was the ultimate answer to sleepless nights. One spoonful and your racing thoughts would soften into mist, your nerves dulled to the point of surrender. You unstop with a bottle, the scent sharp and earthy, a little like bitter wine mixed with medicine. It's oddly inviting, the way danger often is. Laudanum wasn't hidden in the shadows back then. It was sold openly, prescribed by doctors, and even advertised in newspapers. Mothers dosed their fussy children with it. Writers swore it unlocked their creativity, and physicians recommended it as readily as we reach for aspirin. Historians still argue whether Victorians underestimated its addictive power or simply ignored the warning signs because they loved the results too much. One mainstream fact. Thomas de Quincey's confessions of an English opium eater turned laudanum into both a scandal and a fascination. His descriptions of fantastical dreams and crippling addiction made it a household name. Yet despite the cautionary tale, bottles remain on every nightstand. You imagine yourself tipping back the thick liquid, the sweetness coating your tongue, the warmth burning down your throat. At first there's relief, a heavy wave pulling at your limbs. But it's deceptive. You might fall asleep, or you might lie in that twilight state where you're not awake, not dreaming, just trapped. The peculiar tidbit? Some pharmacists flavored laudanum with spices like cinnamon or nutmeg, marketing it as a bedtime cordial. Imagine sipping what tastes like Christmas pudding. Except this pudding could kill you. It wasn't uncommon for polite society to pass around laudanum at evening gatherings, as casually as after dinner mints. You'd smile, nod, and dose yourself into oblivion, all in the name of health. You lie there now, imagining the gamble. Take too little, and you remain wide awake, jittery, and frustrated. Take too much, and you risk hallucinations so vivid they follow you into the day. There are stories of patients seeing grotesque figures lurking in corners or feeling insects crawl beneath their skin. And yet, in desperation, many Victorians returned to bottle night after night, convinced that the cure was only one more sip away. Doctors praised laudanum for its versatility. It was prescribed not only for insomnia, but also for coughs, diarrhea, toothaches, and even broken hearts. The sovereign remedy. They called it. You picture your physician with a grave expression, scratching across his notebook. Insomnia, laudanum, 25 drops at bedtime. Behind the solemnity, though, is the quiet truth that he doesn't know what else to do. You imagine yourself staring at the ceiling, laudanum fog seeping into your brain. The silence of the room grows louder, shadows shifting with each flicker of candlelight. Was that movement by the dresser? Did the curtain sway? You blink, unsure if it's a drug or your imagination. Either way, sleep still refuses to come. That was the irony. The cure often amplified the problem. You might drift into unconsciousness, only to wake 2 hours later drenched in sweat, heart pounding, mind racing worse than before. In households across London, bottles emptied faster than doctors could keep track. Diaries mention it casually. Took my draft before bed, slept little. Addiction was rarely named. Dependence disguised as routine. Families treated it like tea or brandy, a nightly necessity rather than a dangerous crutch. Historians still argue whether Victorians recognized the risks or denial was simply easier than acknowledging their reliance on a liquid crutch. You set the vial down again, the glass cool in your hand, the liquid within sloshing faintly. Maybe you're tempted, maybe you're wary. Either way, the bottle stays on the table, a silent witness to another restless night. Around you, the air hangs heavy, the curtains suffocating, the sachets faint, and the clock ticks with maddening precision. One cheeky thought drifts in. If this is what counted as a miracle cure, maybe sleeplessness wasn't the worst fate after all. At least lying awake won't leave you hallucinating spiders or craving cinnamon-flavored opium for breakfast. Still, you can't help but wonder how many Victorians slipped into dreams thanks to this little bottle, and how many never woke again. The laudanum bottle still sits there, glinting in the candlelight, but tonight you decide to pass it by. Instead, you reach for something that feels more harmless, more homely, a jug of warm milk. The Victorians believed deeply in the digestive connection to sleep. A stomach at peace, they said, meant a mind at rest. So, you picture yourself in the kitchen, ladle clinking softly as you pour thick milk into a ceramic mug, steam curling in the lamplight. You sip. It's creamy, comforting, maybe even cloying. Doctors swore by this ritual, claiming the lactic acid in milk had a calming effect on nerves. Historians still argue whether there was any physiological truth to this, or whether it was simply placebo of routine, the quiet of preparation, the heat against your palms, the softness of a taste convincing you it must help. The quirky part? Some households didn't stop at plain milk. Recipes call for stirring in nutmeg, honey, or even crushed oyster shells. Yes, you heard that right. Powdered oyster shell, believed to fortify the body before rest. Imagine choking that down, gritting chalky grit between your teeth, hoping it will lull you into dreamland. You probably wouldn't survive one Victorian midnight without gagging, but the ritual mattered. Families gathered in parlors after supper, sipping their warm cups while lamps flickered low. It wasn't just about sleep, it was about ending the day with calm, in a world where calm was scarce. Industrial noise clattered through cities, anxiety over finances gnawed at minds, and the constant churn of change kept nerves stretched tight. A cup of milk symbolized retreat from all of that. Doctors reinforced it, often with long lectures. Avoid heavy meats after dusk, they'd write, lest the digestion be overtaxed. Beef and puddings were for daylight. Evenings were for light fare. Toast, soup, milk. The theory was that if the stomach worked too hard at night, the brain would stay awake in sympathy. One physician even declared, to sleep soundly is to dine wisely. You sip another mouthful and smirk. It's basically the Victorian version of diet influencers giving bedtime tips. Not everyone agreed, though some patients found warm milk nauseating, particularly when mixed with lingering smells of coal smoke or lamp oil. Diaries complain of heaviness of stomach and churning bowels after the ritual. Historians still debate whether doctors prescribed it too broadly, ignoring individual reactions, or whether people simply couldn't resist complaining. For the wealthy, the ritual became elaborate. Milk was served in delicate porcelain cups, flavored with cinnamon or rose water, accompanied by biscuits meant to be bland enough not to disturb digestion. For the poor, it was often just a quick gulp of thin, lukewarm liquid poured hastily before bed. Yet across classes, the message was the same. Soothe the stomach, soothe the self. You can almost feel it now. The mug warm against your hands, your body loosening slightly as you swallow. Maybe it's the heat, maybe it's a routine, or maybe it's just the comfort of doing what generations have done before you. A modern aside drifts into your thoughts. You realize this is still advice tossed around today. Drink something warm. Avoid heavy meals. Trust your gut to lead your brain. Some habits cling to us like old wallpaper. You lean back into the pillow, milk's warmth spreading through you. For a moment, your eyelids actually feel heavy, your breath slower, the clock's ticking duller. But just when you think you're on the edge of dreams, your stomach gurgles loudly, reminding you that oyster shell milk probably wasn't your best choice. You sigh, half amused, half resigned. The candle gutters low, your mug empty, the room thick with silence. And still, sleep dances just out of reach, teasing you with its absence. The warm milk was supposed to be a gentle guarantee. But for you tonight, it's just another chapter in the long, drawn-out tale of Victorian insomnia. The warm milk has left a heaviness in your belly, not quite sleep-inducing, more like a quiet protest. You set the empty mug aside and glance toward the foot of the bed, where a small copper basin waits. It's time for one of the stranger prescriptions Victorians swore by: foot baths and mustard poultices. You sit up, the floorboards creaking under your weight, and lower your feet into the basin. The water is lukewarm, with a faint, sharp tang of mustard powder mixed in. It prickles your skin almost immediately, like tiny sparks running across your toes. The idea, so doctors insisted, was that drawing blood downward toward the feet would relieve congestion in the brain. In other words, get the head quiet by making the feet scream. Historians still argue whether this was rooted in circulation theory or simply another imaginative stab in the dark. The mainstream fact: hydrotherapy was hugely fashionable in Victorian England. From sprawling spas and baths to makeshift wash basins at home, people were convinced water could cure everything from headaches to moral weakness. A nightly soak was prescribed as often as any tonic. Some manuals even offered exact times. Immerse the feet for 12 minutes, then retire without delay. Too short, and the treatment failed. Too long, and you risked fainting. You try to imagine explaining to a modern doctor that you've been diligently timing your mustard foot soak. The quirky tidbit? Mustard poultices weren't just for feet. They were slapped onto chests, backs, even scalps, believed to draw out the excess heat of the nerves. In practice, they left blotchy red patches and a smell that lingered for days. Imagine climbing into bed beside your spouse reeking of mustard seeds, both of you pretending it was romantic. Somewhere in Victorian England, someone was surely called the mustard man behind his back. You wiggle your toes in the basin, the sting growing sharper, your skin flushing pink. The sensation is distracting. Perhaps that was the point. If you're thinking about your burning feet, you're not obsessing over the clock or your restless thoughts. It's the Victorian equivalent of scrolling through TikTok. Not restful, but at least diverting. Physicians promoted poultices with solemn confidence. They will restore balance to the humors, they declared, as if the human body were a misbehaving teapot. And yet, some admitted that patients reported strange dreams afterward, visions of running a fire, of wandering across endless yellow fields. Historians still debate whether mustard oil really had a neurological effect, or if people simply inhaled too much of the pungent vapor. The floor creaks again as you remove your feet, pat them dry with a coarse towel, and slip back into bed. Your soles tingle, warm and almost buzzing. Maybe, just maybe, the discomfort has made your head feel lighter. Or maybe it's just another trick, another Victorian ritual that soothes more through faith than science. You lie back, eyes half closed, and imagine households across Britain performing the same strange dance. Fathers soaking their feet, mothers heating poultices by the fire, children peeking curiously at the basin. The smell of mustard drifting through narrow hallways, mingling with coal smoke and damp wool. This wasn't just medicine. It was nightly theater, a ritual everyone played their part in. Your toes still tingle as you pull the covers over them. You can't decide whether you're calmer or simply exhausted from the effort. One thing is certain. Victorian nights were never quiet experiments. They were full of smells, stings, rituals, and endless little tricks, all in service of chasing a sleep that refused to come easily. The clock ticks again, steady and smug. You sigh, thinking, if your brain doesn't quiet down after mustard poultices, maybe nothing will. And yet, you know the Victorians had dozens more remedies waiting, each one stranger than the last. Your feet are still tingling faintly from the mustard bath when another cure drifts into your mind, one both delightful and dubious, the alcohol nightcap. Victorians love to draw a blurry line between medicine and merriment, and doctors themselves often recommended a nip of something strong before bed. You glance at the sideboard, where a crystal decanter catches the candlelight, amber liquid shimmering inside. Brandy? Whiskey? Sherry? It hardly matters. They all promise the same thing, to calm the nerves and lull the body. You pour a small glass. The scent rises sharp and warm, carrying hints of oak, spice, and smoke. You take a sip, the heat sliding down your throat, pooling in your chest like a gentle fire. For a moment, you do feel calmer, your thoughts loosening their grip. Victorians weren't wrong. Alcohol can sedate in the short term, but, as physicians eventually admitted, it also disrupted the deeper rhythms of sleep. You might drift off quickly, only to wake at 3 a.m. with your heart racing and your mouth dry as sandpaper. Historians still argue whether Victorian doctors genuinely believed in alcohol's long-term benefits, or if they simply enjoyed prescribing something they themselves indulged in nightly. A mainstream fact: hot toddies, whiskey mixed with hot water, lemon, and sugar, were prescribed as both cold remedy and sleep aid. Some doctors even recommended adding a dash of nutmeg or cinnamon for digestive harmony. You picture yourself clutching a steaming mug, its spiced sweetness promising relief, though the kick of whiskey makes your head spin faster than your eyelids can close. The quirky tidbit? In some households, beer was given to children as a sleep aid. Imagine tucking in a fussy 6-year-old a mug of ale and a pat on the head. There, now you'll rest. Unsurprisingly, this practice was quietly discouraged by the late 19th century, but not before an entire generation had been lulled by hops. You finish your glass and notice the familiar fuzz creeping into your mind. The world softens, candlelight blurs, and for a brief moment, you think you might actually drift away. But then comes a rebound. Your cheeks flush, your pulse quickens, your brain, instead of slowing, begins to chatter louder. So much for the miracle cure. You lie back, staring at the ceiling, caught in that irritating state of being drowsy yet restless, a place alcohol knows all too well. Doctors often argued in journals about the proper dose. Some swore a single glass was beneficial, while others warned against excess. One stern physician wrote that more than 2 ounces of spirits courts delirium, though one suspect he tested that limit often. Historians still debate whether these guidelines were serious medical advice, or just attempts to regulate society's drinking habits under the cloak of health. You imagine Victorian dinner parties winding down, the men retreating to a study with brandy, the women sipping cordial in the parlor. Inevitably, someone would mention their sleepless nights, and advice would flow as freely as a liquor. A glass before bed always helps me. And so, the cycle reinforced itself. Anecdote masquerading as evidence. Habit hardened into tradition. The funny thing? This nightcap ritual never really disappeared. Even today, you'll hear people swear by a glass of wine to unwind. You sip in sympathy with your Victorian counterpart, both of you united across centuries by the same stubborn truth. Alcohol promises much, but delivers little when it comes to restful slumber. The candle burns lower, shadows stretch across the wallpaper, and the decanter gleams faintly in the corner. Your mouth feels a touch dry already, your brain humming with restless chatter. You sigh, realizing the nightcap has betrayed you yet again. Perhaps tomorrow you'll try another cure. For now, you roll onto your side, muttering something sarcastic even in your half-drowsy state. Thanks, doctor. I'll be sure to toast you at 3 a.m. The brandy glow fades, leaving you dry-mouthed and restless. So you flop back against the mattress, hoping the bed itself might offer salvation. But even here, in the supposed heart of comfort, Victorians could not agree. You press your palms into feather-filled softness, then roll onto a board hidden beneath the sheets. Yes, a literal plank. Some Victorians swore the body only rested properly on hard surfaces, while others demanded nothing less than a mountain of goose down. And so, beds became battlegrounds. The mainstream fact: mattress debates were everywhere in the 19th century. Upholsterers advertised orthopedic springs, while moralists praised Spartan austerity. Soft beds were accused of weakening the spine, promoting laziness, even encouraging immoral dreams. Hard beds, meanwhile, were supposed to build character. You imagine lying stiff on a wooden board, aching in every joint, wondering if your soul really feels stronger or just sorer. Historians still argue whether these prescriptions were medical or moral, given how often sermons crept into sleep advice. The quirky tidbit: some Victorians stuffed mattresses with seaweed. Yes, dried seaweed hauled inland, spread and packed into ticking. It was said to improve circulation and smell faintly of the ocean. Romantic, until the damp air made it rot. Imagine nodding off only to realize your bed smells suspiciously like a fishmonger's stall. You dream of seagulls before you dreamed of peace. You lie back again, bouncing slightly on the feather bed. Wealthier families prize down mattresses, layered high, so soft you practically vanish inside them. Some beds were so deep that climbing out required effort. Hardly ideal at 3 in the morning with a bladder full of warm milk. For the less fortunate, straw remained the standard. Scratchy, uneven, alive with creaks, and sometimes with insects. A sleepless night was one thing. A flea bite on the ankle was another. Doctors loved to lecture on posture. 2. The body must be straight, not curled, they'd insist, as if sleep were military training. Bed manuals advised placing a small wooden bolster beneath the neck, promoting alignment. You picture yourself trying it. The discomfort immediate, your head tilted back like you're awaiting a guillotine. Relaxing? Not exactly. The irony is that no one seemed satisfied. Too soft, and you drown in down. Too hard, and your bones ached. Too rustic, and the fleas joined you. Even the wealthy tossed and turned, despite their elegant bedsteads draped in velvet. It didn't matter whether you were a duke or a factory worker. Sleep remained elusive, mattresses merely the scapegoat. As you roll again, you can almost hear the voices of time, upholsterers promising scientific rest, doctors urging moral firmness, neighbors boasting, "We sleep on nothing but boards." You sigh, thinking how some arguments never end. Even today, mattresses spark debate. Memory foam versus spring, soft versus firm, toppers versus bare. Perhaps sleeplessness is less about the bed and more about the brain lying on it. Still, you sink into the feather pillow, the fabric crinkling faintly beneath your ear. You think about all those Victorians who must have convinced themselves their mattress was the culprit, when really it was just another piece of the puzzle. You smirk at the absurdity. If lying awake on seaweed or straw doesn't teach humility, nothing will. The room creaks softly as the building settles. You tug the blankets tighter, shifting between softness and hardness, wondering which side history would approve of tonight. One thing is certain. No matter what mattress you choose, the ticking clock at the mantel keeps steady time, reminding you that comfort is never quite the same as sleep. The mattress creaks beneath you as you toss again, but now your eyes are drawn upward, to the faint glow filtering through the heavy drapes. Tonight, the household has extinguished the gaslights early, plunging the streets outside into relative quiet. Yet the debate about light, darkness, and sanity lingers in your mind, because in Victorian times, even the absence of light was a cure to be argued over. You tug the curtains tighter. Complete darkness was thought by some to be essential for moral rest. Doctors argued that even a flicker from the street lamp or the faintest moonbeam might agitate the nerves. You picture the household bustling to snuff every candle, turn down every lamp, and cover the grate in the fireplace so no ember dare glow. Sleep, they insisted, came only in thick, uninterrupted shadow. Historians still argue whether this obsession was rooted in genuine physiological observation or the Victorian love of control. but others feared too much dark. Silence and shadow could breed terrors of the mind. Patients confessed to lying awake, heart pounding, convinced the furniture had shifted, or that a face floated just beyond the bed curtains. Doctors wrote of phantasmagoria of the sleepless, hallucinations that crept in with the pitch black. The quirky tidbit? Some people intentionally left a small lamp burning, not for comfort, but because they believed shadows themselves could suffocate. Imagine a physician prescribing just enough glow to keep the demons away. Gaslight itself complicated matters. For centuries, nights had been naturally dark, but by the mid-1800s, whole neighborhoods were lit up like perpetual twilight. This artificial glow disrupted sleep cycles in ways Victorians couldn't yet name. Workers now stayed awake longer. Theaters buzzed late. Households pushed bedtime back. You imagine lying awake, faint orange light sneaking past curtains, casting jittery shadows on the wallpaper. Is it the lamp outside or your restless brain keeping you awake? Even then, no one knew for sure. The mainstream fact: reformers like Dr. Forbes Winslow wrote essays warning that artificial light disturbed the natural repose of the brain. He urged moderation. Lamps early in the evening, but all extinguished before midnight. Whether people listened is another story. After all, who wants to stumble around a cold, heated house in complete darkness, risking a tumble down the stairs, all in the name of sleep science? You lie there, testing both theories. Curtain closed, too hot, too airless. Curtain cracked, too bright, too exposed. You can't help but laugh softly at the irony. Sleeplessness itself became a problem of balance, caught between extremes. Too much light and you're restless. Too little and you're haunted. A Victorian Goldilocks problem, except there's no just right. You imagine the odd contraptions people invented. Shaded glass domes to soften candlelight, tinted lamp chimneys to cast gentler hues, even little perforated tin covers that scattered light like stars across the ceiling. One sleepless diarist claimed that watching the star patterns lulled him to dreams. Another insisted that same flicker left her wide awake, contemplating eternity. Historians still debate whether light influenced dreams themselves or merely became the scapegoat for deeper anxieties. The candle on your own table flickers low, shadows twitching across the wallpaper's florals. For a moment, you think you see them move, the ivy creeping, the roses nodding, the daisies bending toward you. Perhaps it's the lack of sleep, perhaps it's the faint glow, but the effect is unsettling enough to make you squeeze your eyes shut. You remember the advice in a household guide. If visions plague the mind, extinguish all light and repeat the Lord's Prayer until slumber descends. A charming theory, though hardly a guarantee. Your breath evens for a moment, the darkness thick as velvet. Yet your mind refuses to rest, replaying the paradox Victorians never solved. Should sleep come in darkness absolute or in the safety of a faint, steady glow? You open your eyes again, resigned, watching the last of the candle bend low, until the wick curls into smoke and the room is swallowed whole. And still you lie awake. The room is fully dark now, the candle guttered, leaving you alone with the faint ticking of the mantel clock. Your ears sharpen, searching for something, anything, to replace the silence. And that's when you remember another Victorian experiment. Sound. If light was suspect, perhaps noise, or the right kind of noise, could coax the body into surrender. You lie back and imagine the odd devices that once filled bedrooms. One gentleman invented a wooden box fitted with small metal reeds, meant to hum gently like distant bees. Another advertised a contraption that released a faint whistle at regular intervals, promising to mimic the sounds of nature. In practice, it resembled a kettle on the verge of boiling. Still, people swore by it. Historians still argue whether these devices truly calmed nerves or simply distracted the sleepless until exhaustion took over. The mainstream fact: Victorians also lean on familiar domestic noises. Cats purring near the hearth, the rumble of a carriage wheel in the distance. Even the rhythmic thud of a clock were considered soporific. Families often encouraged pets to sleep in bedrooms not just for warmth, but because the sound of breathing or gentle purring was believed to settle frayed minds. You imagine curling beneath the blankets, lulled by the rise and fall of a sleepy cat on your chest, its little rumble a metronome for your thoughts. The quirky tidbit: Some pamphlets earnestly suggested placing a jar of buzzing flies near the bed, an improvised natural sound machine. The theory was that the steady hum mirrored country life and soothed the nerves. You shudder at the thought, picturing yourself swatting in frustration rather than drifting to dreams. Still, somewhere in Victorian London, someone must have lain awake listening to flies, convinced it was therapy. Music was another tool. Households hired musicians or instructed children to play softly in the next room. Lullabies weren't just for infants. Grown men confessed to nodding off the repetitive strum of a harp or the droning hum of a hymn. Doctors claimed music aligned the heartbeat with rhythm, producing harmonious slumber. You picture yourself half-dozing to a cousin's endless violin practice. Less harmony, more irritation. Yet maybe that was a trick. Annoyance tiring the brain into surrender. And then, of course, there were the believers in silence. Some insisted that any noise, no matter how gentle, only aggravated the restless mind. They packed curtains tighter, muffled carpets thicker, and demanded absolute hush from everyone in the household. Servants tiptoed. Children were hushed. Clocks were even stopped. The result? Patients lying awake in eerie stillness, ears ringing from the absence of sound. Too much silence, it seemed, was just as maddening as too much noise. You test the theories yourself. You strain to hear the night. A distant carriage clattering down the cobblestones, a dog barking faintly, your own breath uneven. Then you hum softly, just to break the quiet. The vibration in your throat is oddly soothing. For a moment, you think of all the people across centuries who hummed, sang, or whispered themselves towards sleep. The melody matters less than the repetition. Historians still debate whether Victorians truly understood the psychology of sound, or if they simply stumbled on truths we now take for granted. White noise machines today echo the same principle. Steady, predictable sound masking disruptive chaos. You smile in the dark, realizing that your phone's sleep app, with its looping rainfall and cat purr tracks, is nothing but a polished echo of Victorian experiments. You close your eyes, trying to picture the purr of a cat, the hum of bees, the creak of a distant carriage. For a few moments, it works. Your mind wanders, your breathing steadies. And then the silence floods back in, stubborn, unyielding. The clock ticks again, louder than before, and you open your eyes, resigned. Victorian nights were never truly quiet. They were filled with experiments, contraptions, and theories about the perfect sound to lull the restless. And here you are, still awake, still listening, waiting for that one perfect hum that never quite arrives. The silence presses against you again, heavier than the curtains, and you shift uncomfortably beneath the starch-stiff sheets. Perhaps, you think, comfort itself is the missing ingredient. That's when your mind drifts toward Victorian sleepwear, an entire battlefield of propriety versus practicality. You tug at the collar of your starched nightshirt. Its linen stiff enough to stand upright on its own. Victorians adore the image of a respectable sleeper. Men in long, button gowns reaching nearly to the ankles. Women in layered nightdresses with frills, lace, and high collars. You try to relax, but the fabric scratches at your neck, clings damply to your chest, and tangles at your legs each time you roll over. The mainstream fact. Clothing reformers of the era repeatedly complained that restrictive nightwear ruined rest, though they were often dismissed as eccentric. And then there's the peculiar matter of corsets. By day, many women wore them religiously, and some doctors argued they should be kept on at night to maintain posture. Imagine trying to sleep while trussed up like a roast chicken, ribs squeezed, lungs compressed. Historians still argue whether women actually followed this advice or simply nodded politely before unlacing in private. The quirky tidbit? A few reform manuals suggested men might benefit from light corsetry at night too, to train the posture. That's one experiment you'd probably abandon after 5 minutes. Still, sleepwear wasn't just about comfort. It was about morality. Night clothes had to protect modesty, especially in households where servants might appear suddenly with candles or water jugs. The idea of being caught in bed without proper attire was scandalous. Thus, even as your body begged for freedom, social expectation demanded a crisp nightshirt, preferably freshly laundered and scented with starch. Of course, not everyone obeyed. Some writers confessed in letters to sleeping with little more than a blanket, savoring the sense of freedom. Others invented compromises. Loose gowns with ties instead of buttons, lighter fabrics like cotton instead of stiff linen. By the late 19th century, advertisements for sanitary sleepwear promoted looser fits, claiming they improved circulation and nerve health. A small but growing number of Victorians began to embrace the radical idea that comfort might matter more than propriety. You shift again, the linen rasping against your skin. You imagine the laundry process that made it so stiff. Boiled, beaten, bleached, pressed. Perhaps half the reason you can't sleep is that your clothes are doing their best impression of sandpaper. You mutter under your breath, remembering some advice from an etiquette guide. The sleeper must not indulge in softness, lest sloth enter the soul. A lofty sentiment, but in practice, it just means you're itchy. The irony? Nightwear became a booming industry, with fashion houses designing elaborate sets. Ruffles, embroidery, decorative buttons. Things no one would see unless invited. It was as if sleeplessness itself had become a stage, and the costume had to match. You roll onto your side, the fabric twisting, and wonder whether fashion trumped function in every corner of Victorian life. Spoiler, it usually did. Historians still debate whether these layers of clothing were about warmth, morality, or simply habit. Likely all three. And while some Victorians dreamed in starched collars, others probably lay awake, like you now, cursing the scratch at the nape of the neck. You reach down, tugging at the hem, fantasizing for a moment about tearing the thing off and hurling it at the curtains. But propriety wins, as it always did in Victorian bedrooms. Instead, you sigh, shift again, and resign yourself to peculiar truth. In the age of starched nightshirts and corsetless freedom, sleepwear was yet another enemy of sleep. The clock ticks on, smug as ever. Your nightshirt clings, and sleep remains, maddeningly, just out of reach. The nightshirt scratches against your skin as you roll once more, resigned to the fact that comfort isn't arriving by way of linen. Your eyes land on the small stack of books resting on the nightstand. Victorians, ever resourceful, believed reading could lull the brain into submission, so long as you chose wisely. You pick up a hefty volume, its spine stiff, its title stamped in gold, Moral Tales for the Home. Not exactly thrilling bedtime fare. The mainstream fact: Victorians prized didactic literature as a tool for discipline, not entertainment. Instead of stories filled with daring escapes or romance, you get long-winded accounts of virtuous apprentices resisting temptation, or essays on the value of punctuality. In theory, the lesson bored you into morality. In practice, it just bored you into staring at the ceiling. You turn a page. The prose drones on about a boy who refuses to steal apples and is rewarded with a lecture on honesty. You blink slowly, waiting for drowsiness to creep in. Historians still argue whether these books were truly intended as sleep aids, or if families simply pressed them into service out of desperation. Either way, they became a staple of bedtime rituals. The quirky tidbit? Some manuals outright recommended reading the dullest book at hand before sleep. Clergy members often handed out tracts filled with endless sermons, confident that their words contained both soul and insomnia. There are diary entries from the time confessing that people would fall asleep mid-paragraph, only to wake with a book on their face. The candle burned dangerously low beside them. You imagine the embarrassment of dozing off just as a sermon scolds you about sloth. Not all readings were moralistic. Some turned to poetry, long epics about farming or nature. Others revisited Shakespeare, though not the exciting bits. Instead, they gravitated toward the quieter passages, the ones filled with musings on time and fate. One gentleman wrote that he read Henry IV not for the plot, but for the steady rhythm of the words, like rain upon the window. You picture yourself mouthing verses slowly, the cadence soothing, the meaning fading into haze. You run your finger down the page, the candlelight blurring the print. The words themselves lose shape, becoming soft marks on paper. Your eyes sting from the effort, but sleep refuses to follow. Perhaps it's the very act of reading, sitting upright, turning pages, that keeps your brain alert. Or perhaps the moralizing tone leaves you more annoyed than calmed. You mutter, "Yes, I get honesty is good," and flip the book shut with a sigh. Yet you can't help but marvel at the ritual. Across countless parlors and bedrooms, families read themselves towards sleep, even when the material was dreary. Children lulled by nursery rhymes, adults by sermons, the elderly by newspapers listing shipping arrivals. Everyone, in some way, sought the spell of words to dull the restless mind. Historians still debate whether this worked as intended. Some argue the rhythm of reading, the sound of one's own voice, provided a meditative calm. Others note that stimulating content, an exciting chapter, a shocking headline, could just as easily keep readers awake until dawn. The boundary between cure and culprit was razor thin. You set the book aside, the cover thumping softly against the wood. The silence floods back in, but now your head hums faintly with the cadence of sentences, their monotony still echoing. Perhaps that's the closest thing to sleep you'll find tonight, being lulled not by rest, but by boredom dressed as wisdom. The clock ticks, the candle sputters, and you lie back once more, waiting for moral tales to work their peculiar brand of magic. The book lies closed on the nightstand, its dull sermon still buzzing faintly in your head. But imagine now that you weren't left alone with your own restless rituals. Imagine being studied. In the Victorian age, that notion wasn't science fiction. Early sleep clinics began to take shape, primitive experiments in observing the mysteries of sleeplessness. You picture yourself in a narrow room, not unlike your bedroom but stripped of homeliness. A physician sits at a desk nearby, quill poised, eyes fixed on you, as if your tossing and turning might reveal secrets of the soul. His ink pot gleams in the candlelight, the scratching of his pen steady as he notes every sigh, every shift, every flutter of eyelids. The mainstream fact. By the late 19th century, doctors such as Dr. George Beer began writing on neurasthenia and other nervous conditions, of which insomnia was considered a major symptom. Observing patients overnight became one way to legitimize insomnia as a medical subject rather than just a private misery. The quirky tidbit? These early clinics didn't have sophisticated tools, no electrodes, no heart monitors. Instead, some physicians placed threads across the bed to see if the patient moved, or even dusted flour lightly on the sheets to track shifting bodies by morning. Imagine waking up covered in powder, wondering if you've been baked like a loaf of bread. Historians still argue whether these methods provided meaningful data or were simply elaborate ways to justify billing anxious aristocrats. You lie there, watched, self-conscious. The very presence of observation keeps your body tense. It's a Victorian version of today's paradox. Going to a sleep study, wired up with sensors, and failing to sleep precisely because you're being studied. Nothing makes slumber more elusive than someone scribbling notes every time you twitch. Doctors, however, were fascinated. They debated whether insomnia was rooted in the nerves, the digestion, or even moral weakness. Some argued it was a symptom of over-civilization, the cost of modern life with its trains, telegrams, and endless reading. Others insisted it revealed a defect in the patient's constitution, something nearly hereditary. Patients, caught between these theories, submitted themselves to scrutiny, hoping that some record of their sleeplessness might lead to a cure. You imagine the physician leaning close, candle casting his shadow long across the floor. He whispers to himself, pulse steady, eyes restless, subject yawns but does not drift. You roll onto your side, pretending not to notice, but inside, your thoughts whirl louder than ever. If anything, the scrutiny makes you more awake. Yet there was something oddly comforting in being taken seriously. To have insomnia documented, written into ledgers, transformed from private shame into medical case. Patients often describe relief at simply being listened to, even if the cure never arrived. Historians still debate whether these clinics were more therapy than science, a ritual of validation disguised as research. The physician finally dozes at his desk, quill slipping from his hand, leaving you alone again with the candle's flicker. You smile faintly at the irony. The man studying insomnia succumbs to sleep before you do. The ledger lies open, ink drying on half-finished notes about your stubborn wakefulness. The room grows quiet once more, but now you feel oddly lighter. The act of being watched, of your struggle written down, almost makes it easier to accept. Perhaps insomnia, in the Victorian imagination, wasn't meant to be solved so much as chronicled, turned into story, into record, into one more ritual for the sleepless. And so, you lie back, aware of the quill scratch lingering in your imagination, the rustle of the physician's coat as he slumps in slumber. You still awake. Him, already gone to dreams. The clock ticks on, impartial as ever, recording the passage of another long Victorian night. The doctor's quill lies still in his hand, ink dry on half-formed notes. But you remain awake, your body humming with a strange electricity of sleeplessness. That word, electricity, sparks another memory, for Victorians were fascinated by it, convinced it held the power to heal, to balance, even to deliver slumber. You picture yourself stretched out stiffly on a narrow couch, while a physician wheels in an ungainly contraption of wires, magnets, and buzzing coils. He assures you it's perfectly safe, though sparks leap faintly when he adjusts the knobs. The mainstream fact: by the mid-19th century, electrotherapy was a popular treatment for insomnia and other nervous disorders. Doctors believed magnetic currents could realign the body's vital forces, harmonizing nerves that had slipped into chaos. A strap is fastened around your wrist, another at your ankle, and suddenly a faint tingle runs up your leg. It prickles like static, unsettling but oddly fascinating. The physician nods gravely. The current calms the restless humors. You're not entirely convinced. Historians still argue whether these treatments were medical innovation or pure spectacle, given how often doctors demonstrated them in crowded lecture halls, sparks flying dramatically as patients twitched on stage. The quirky tidbit? Some home versions were sold as magnetic pillows or electrical belts, advertised in glossy pamphlets promising restorative slumber. You could strap on a belt lined with magnets and lie in bed convinced that unseen forces were rearranging your nerves. Imagine trying to roll over in the night, only to clunk against your partner, with what amounts to a portable horseshoe collection strapped to your torso. You wiggle slightly under the imagined buzz of current. At first, it distracts you, like the mustard poultices on your feet. The sensation pulls focus away from the spinning thoughts in your head. Maybe that was the point. If your body tingled enough, perhaps your brain would finally surrender. But then the prickling becomes irritating, a reminder that you're still very much awake, tethered to wires, a room smelling faintly of singed cloth. Doctors disagreed about dosage. Too weak a current, and nothing happened. Too strong, and patients risked burns or fainting. One medical journal boasts of a man who fell asleep instantly under magnetic treatment. Those skeptics point out he may have simply passed out from pain. Still, desperate Victorians lined up to try, their diaries filled with hopeful notes. I endured 15 minutes of the current, felt calmer, though no sleep followed. You can't help but smirk, thinking about how these experiments echo modern gadgets. Weighted blankets marketed as calming, light therapy lamps promising circadian resets. Swap wires for Wi-Fi, and you realize not much has changed. Sleeplessness makes people willing to try anything. Historians still debate whether magnetic therapy was genuinely pioneering or just a Victorian version of late-night shopping channels. The physician unstraps the device, leaving your skin faintly red, your nerves buzzing as though tiny bees march through your limbs. He looks pleased, jotting another note into his ledger. Patient more relaxed. You resist the urge to correct him. After all, you feel anything but drowsy. Back in bed, you can almost hear the hum of invisible currents lingering in the air. It's not unpleasant, exactly, but it's hardly the oblivion you crave. Instead, you lie awake with a faint tingling reminder that even in the age of gaslight and starched sheets, Victorians dreamed of harnessing the invisible forces of the universe to coax a stubborn body toward rest. And you, still stubbornly awake, realize that some experiments were less about science than about hope, the desperate hope that one more tingle, one more spark, might finally switch off the mind. The faint buzzing of imagined currents still clings to your skin, but now the air shifts with something softer, more fragrant. You reach for a small folded handkerchief resting on the nightstand, embroidered at the edges and dampened with perfume. This, too, was a Victorian cure. Perfumed cloths, soaked in scents thought to soothe the brain and coax the eyelids closed. You lift it to your face. The smell of lavender and rosewater lingers, faintly sweet, faintly sour from time. The mainstream fact: Scented remedies were recommended by doctors and advertised by apothecaries, especially for nervous conditions like insomnia. Aromatic oils were believed to calm the overstimulated nerves of city dwellers, who spent their days assaulted by smoke, noise, and endless stimulation. One guide suggested laying a perfumed kerchief upon the brow until the spirit yields to slumber. But then there were the stronger options. Ether, chloroform, even ammonia. Fumes inhaled from cloth as a quick fix. You imagine holding such a kerchief to your face, the vapor burning your nostrils, your head spinning, as if you've fallen into a carnival ride. Historians still argue whether these soothing vapors were ever truly meant for everyday use, or whether desperate patients simply co-opted them after seeing them in medical demonstrations. The quirky tidbit: some households swore by sprinkling eau de cologne onto pillows before bed. It wasn't just about smell, it was about class. A whiff of fashionable fragrance marked you as refined, even in sleep. Diaries mention hosts apologizing if guest rooms lacked scented linen, as though the absence of perfume doomed visitors to wakefulness. Imagine being kept up all night not by noise, but by social shame. They gave me an unscented pillow. You press the kerchief against your temples, its damp coolness pleasant against the heat of your restless skin. For a moment, the scent does feel calming, like walking past a summer garden at dusk. But it fades quickly, leaving only the stale undertone of cloth. Worse, your head feels a touchlight, as though the boundary between calm and fainting is perilously thin. Doctors debated endlessly about which aromas were truly effective. Camphor, peppermint, and valerian root often topped lists. Each was said to target specific nerves, though evidence was little more than anecdote. Camphor calms the heart. Valerian soothes the brain. One physician declared with confidence, though his patients confessed that valerian simply smelled like dirty socks. Historians still debate whether these prescriptions reflected genuine experimentation or a fascination with exotic imports from apothecaries. You lie back, handkerchief resting on your brow, eyes closed. You imagine upper-class women fanning themselves with perfumed cloths at evening parties, then tucking those same handkerchiefs under pillows to summon dreams. You picture apothecaries mixing oils behind polished counters, their shelves lined with tiny glass vials, each promising rest in exchange for a few pennies. The truth, of course, is that smell alone cannot drag you into sleep. It can soothe, yes, or distract, or convince you of its power long enough for fatigue to creep in. But as you breathe in the faint, fading scent, you know it is only another layer in the Victorian ritual. Another hopeful step, another small act of faith. You smile faintly in the dark. Maybe sleep is less about finding the one magic cure and more about stacking these rituals, one after another, until exhaustion finally outweighs restlessness. A sip of milk, a mustard poultice, a whiff of lavender. It's absurd, yes, but it's also oddly human. The candle has gone out. The perfume lingers in you. Still awake, drift once again into that peculiar Victorian cycle of hope, ritual, and disappointment. The handkerchief slips from your brow, its perfume fading into nothing more than a damp patch on the pillow. You roll restlessly, kicking at the sheets, when another peculiar remedy comes to mind, one that dealt not with scent or sound, but with temperature. Victorians swore by the balance of hot and cold, as if the body were a stove that could be adjusted with the right tools. At the foot of the bed sits a small brick, heated earlier by the fire and now wrapped in flannel. You nudge it with your toes, the warmth radiating upward, a comfort in the chill night air. This was a mainstream fact. Hot bricks, soapstones, or bottles of heated water were common companions under the covers, meant to draw the blood downward, relax muscles, and soothe nerves. Physicians called them an aid to circulation, though they were essentially primitive hot water bottles. But then, in contrast, there was ice. Yes, ice, placing cloths against the forehead, temples, or even down the spine. The theory was that a cool brain would quiet its racing thoughts, while the warm feet pulled blood away from the head. Historians still argue whether this hot-cold balancing act was genuine medicine or just elaborate superstition. Still, households dutifully practiced it, juggling extremes until exhaustion finally intervened. The quirky tidbit: some families alternated both tricks at once. A hot brick at the feet, a cold compress on the brow. Imagine lying there like a human teeter-totter, one end steaming, the other shivering, your body uncertain whether to sweat or shiver. Diaries from a time mention strange dreams under such treatments, visions of fire and ice, of chasing shadows across frozen fields. You smirk at the thought. Perhaps those dreams were less prophetic and more the result of a confused nervous system. You shift the hot brick closer, its warmth seeping through the sheets, easing your tingling toes. For a moment, it works. The heat dulls your restlessness, lulling you into a heavy calm. But then your forehead prickles with sweat, the air too still, your body too hot. You reach for a damp rag, lay across your brow, and suddenly you're caught in the Victorian balancing act. Head cool, feet warm, mind somewhere in between. Doctors wrote elaborate instructions about this ritual. Keep the extremities warm while cooling the temples, one manual advised, lest the brain overheat and disturb repose. Others warned against overdoing it. Too much heat, and the blood would rush excessively to the limbs. Too much cold, and you risk nervous shock. You sigh, amused at the delicate dance of do's and don'ts. Sleep, apparently, was less about surrender and more about managing an elaborate thermostat with bricks and rags. The room around you reflects the obsession with temperature. Curtains seal out drafts, carpets smother the floor, and yet bowls of ice sometimes sit on nightstands, purchased at great expense in the summer months. Imagine hauling blocks of ice through London streets, just so your forehead could be dabbed before bed. It sounds extravagant, but in the Victorian imagination, no effort was too great if it promised rest. You press the rag against your brow, its chill fading quickly, replaced by clammy dampness. The brick at your feet is already cooled, the warmth slipping away, leaving only the faint smell of scorched flannel. And you realize once again that the cure is fleeting. Comfort comes in bursts, but sleep, stubborn as ever, stays beyond reach. Historians still debate whether these rituals helped at all, or they were simply distractions, nightly performances to occupy the anxious. Perhaps the rituals worked not through science, but through the sheer act of doing something, reminding yourself that you hadn't surrendered, that sleep was still being pursued. You smile faintly at the thought, toes pressed against cooling brick, forehead damp beneath the rag. Another hour slips by. The room is dark, the air heavy, your body pulled between fire and ice. And still, the clock ticks, smug and steady, as you lie awake, half-boiled, half-frozen, wholly Victorian in your sleeplessness. The brick has cooled now, no more than a lump of stone beneath the blanket, and the rag on your forehead is clammy and useless. You toss them both aside, deciding perhaps the answer lies not in bed at all. So you slip quietly into slippers, pad down the corridor, and step into the cool night air of a garden bathed in moonlight. This was another cherished Victorian cure, the midnight stroll. Doctors often prescribed gentle movement outdoors, believing that fresh air and the soft rhythms of walking could soothe the overactive mind. The mainstream fact. Public health reformers like Edwin Chadwick pushed the idea that clean air was a tonic for both body and soul, and Victorians carried this into their nightly habits. Patients were told to walk slowly, avoid overexertion, and let the quiet scenery do the work. You pace along a gravel path, the crunch beneath your feet oddly loud in the stillness. The air feels cooler here than in your stifling bedroom, scented faintly with damp earth and roses. For a moment, you inhale deeply, grateful for the space. Historians still argue whether these nocturnal strolls actually improved sleep or simply gave insomniacs something to do while waiting for exhaustion. Either way, they filled countless diaries with notes like, walked 2 circuits of the lawn, felt no drowsiness, but lungs refreshed. The quirky tidbit? Some Victorians went further, believing moonlight itself was medicinal. They stood deliberately under its glow, letting the pale beams wash over their faces. The lunar rays calmed the nervous spirit. One pamphlet declared, you picture yourself tilting your head back, basking in silvery light, though most of you just feel like a garden statue left out too long. The garden isn't entirely peaceful, though. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks. The hedges rustle faintly. Perhaps a hedgehog. Perhaps something more sinister in the imagination. You quicken your pace, gravel crunching faster, your heartbeat louder. For all the talk of calming air, Victorian gardens at midnight could be eerie places, long shadows, Strange noises, a creeping sense of being watched. Some diarists confess that their walks left them more rattled than before. Still, there's a rhythm to it. Step after step, crunch after crunch. Your breathing falls in time with your movement. For a moment, you feel calmer, your restless thoughts trailing behind you in the dark. Maybe this is a trick. Simple motion, the body tricking the mind into slowing. You pause by a bench, sit, and let the breeze cool your flushed face. Doctors advise ending the stroll before the body cooled too much, warning that a chill could undo the benefit. You smile faintly at the contradiction. Open the window and you'll catch a disease, but wander in the night air and you'll cure yourself. Historians still debate whether this tension reflected genuine confusion or the Victorian habit of making rules for every possible outcome. You rise, walking back toward the house, the moonlight painting the gravel path like pale silver ribbons. For a brief moment, the insomnia feels lighter, as though you stepped outside its grip. But as you return to the heavy curtains, the airless bedroom, and the steady tick of clock, the familiar restlessness creeps back in. Still, you carry with you the faint memory of that night air, the cool breath of the garden, the silver wash of moonlight. It doesn't bring sleep, not yet, but adds another layer to the ritual. The hope that tomorrow night, perhaps, the stroll will do what the milk, the poultices, and the perfumes could not. The garden's cool air still lingers in your lungs as you slip back beneath the heavy covers, but rest is no nearer. Your mind spins, restless and unwilling to hush, and you recall yet another Victorian tactic, the simple, repetitive lull of words. If sense and strolls failed, then perhaps prayer or counting could exhaust the brain into stillness. You pull the Bible from the bedside, its leather cover softly wear. The mainstream fact. Countless Victorian households turned to scripture as a nightly ritual, reading aloud or reciting verses until the rhythm dulled the mind. Not for inspiration, not even for meaning, just for the steady cadence of familiar lines. The 23rd Psalm, the Lord's Prayer, genealogies from the Book of Numbers, all chosen not for drama, but for monotony. Historians still argue whether this was spiritual devotion or a practical trick disguised as piety. You try it yourself, whispering softly, each verse spilling into the next. The words blur, the meaning dissolves, and for a moment your eyelids droop. But then your thoughts wander. What if you've skipped a line? Should you start over? And just like that, you're awake again, trapped in your own anxious perfectionism. The quirky tidbit? Some Victorians literally counted sheep, not metaphorically, but with toy figurines or diagrams in almanacs. You imagine yourself dragging wooden sheep across a bedside table, one by one, bleary-eyed but determined. Others recommended counting backwards from 1007s, a mental arithmetic exercise meant to tire the brain. More often than not, it ended in frustration rather than slumber. One diarist admitted, "I reached negative numbers before dawn." Other rituals leaned on repetition, reciting nursery rhymes, singing hymns under breath, or even murmuring the alphabet. The point wasn't content, but rhythm, something to occupy the restless mind without exciting it. Simple words lead to simple sleep, one physician declared, though his patients often begged to differ. You lie there now, muttering numbers, half amused, half desperate. 59, 52, 45. Your voice trails off, the pattern lulling you into a kind of trance. For a fleeting moment, it works, the brain too busy with arithmetic to spin worries. But just as quickly you stumble in the sequence, lose track, and the irritation jars you awake again. Victorians documented these frustrations meticulously. Diaries are filled with lines like, "repeated verses for 2 hours. Felt no relief." Others claim success. At last, the counting did the trick. Historians still debate whether these successes were genuine or merely the natural arrival of exhaustion after long nights. You sigh, placing the Bible back on the table, the faint scent of its leather binding clinging to your hands. You murmur one last line of a psalm, not out of faith but out of habit, hoping the steady cadence will carry you off. Your eyelids flutter, your breath slows, and then, as always, the clock strikes again, dragging you back to wakefulness. Perhaps words are powerful, but tonight they are not powerful enough. You roll onto your side, half amused at the thought. If the Victorians' greatest weapon was boredom, maybe insomnia was always destined to win. You roll onto your back, the Psalms and numbers still circling faintly in your head. The Bible rests heavy on a nightstand, but your body is no closer to surrender. That's when you remember another Victorian fixation, posture. It wasn't just what you did before bed that mattered, but how you arrange yourself once you lay down. You shift against the pillow, trying to mimic the stiff diagrams published in household manuals. One insists you must sleep flat on your back, arms neatly folded over your chest like a corpse in a coffin. Another swears by lying on the right side only, claiming it aids digestion and keeps the heart untroubled. The mainstream fact. Victorian medical guides printed whole sections on proper positions for repose, convinced that angles of the body directly influence health, morality, and dreams. You roll experimentally onto your stomach, only to remember dire warnings. Doctors declare that sleeping face down compressed the lungs and risked suffocation. One even claimed it could invite evil visions by pressing on the brain. Historians still argue whether this was genuine medical advice or simply another example of Victorian moralizing creeping into bedtime. The quirky tidbit: some manuals recommended propping the body halfway upright, with pillows stacked high behind the head, to prevent nightmares. Others even suggested sleeping in armchairs, claiming it prevented congestion of the brain. Imagine dozing upright in a wooden chair, head lolling, neck aching, yet convinced you'd avoided death by a dream. You tug at the pillow again, wondering if you're angled correctly. Doctors prescribe not only positions, but also bedding arrangements. A bolster beneath the knees prevents agitation of the nerves. One advised. Another recommended binding the body with a sheet, so you couldn't roll into dangerous postures. You imagine being trussed up like a cocoon, less sleeper, more specimen. Comfort be damned, at least you'd be aligned. You test them all, back, side, stomach, upright. None feels right. On your back, you feel too stiff, as though rehearsing your own funeral. On your side, your arm falls asleep before you do. On your stomach, your conscience nags with the weight of all those dire warnings. Upright, you simply look ridiculous, a parody of restful repose. And yet, Victorians clung to these rituals with earnest faith. Some even wrote long letters to medical journals about their experiments. 3 nights upon the left side, most disturbed. 3 nights upon the right, most calm. Others confessed they could not sleep at all, unless bound tightly in blankets, as though the restraint itself comforted them. Historians still debate whether posture truly mattered, or if it was just another layer of ritual designed to give illusion of control. You shift again, finally collapsing into whatever shape your body prefers. Define the manuals. The sheets twist, the pillow shifts, your limbs sprawl without elegance. And in that moment, you almost laugh. So much advice, so many diagrams, and yet the body insists on its own stubborn preferences. The clock ticks, the air hangs heavy, and you lie in the dark, half amused, half exasperated. Perhaps posture was never the secret after all. Perhaps the only truth is that the more you think about sleep, the further it drifts. And the Victorians, with all their diagrams and debates, learned that lesson every bit as painfully as you do now. You uncurl yourself from the stiff poses the manuals prescribed, body aching from the effort of trying to sleep like a diagram. Perhaps you think what you need isn't another position at all, but a change of scenery. Victorians, too, often reach this conclusion, though in their case, the scenery wasn't just another room in a house. Sometimes, doctors prescribed entire journeys. You imagine yourself on the deck of a ship, the salty spray in the air, the creak of ropes overhead. See, voyages were touted as remedies for sleeplessness, nervousness, and the vague condition of overwrought minds. The mainstream fact. Physicians of the 19th century often recommended travel, especially voyages, as a cure for nearly everything from melancholy to insomnia. The movement of the waves was thought to lull the body, while the change of air promised to reset the nerves. The quirky tidbit? Some patients were told to travel specifically to exotic places, not for adventure, but for health. An anxious insomniac might be ordered to the Mediterranean, or even to colonies abroad, under the theory that new climates and diets would restore balance. Imagine confessing your sleeplessness to a doctor and being told, "Pack your bag for a 6-week steamship journey." Expensive, yes, but for the wealthy, insomnia became an excuse for grand tours. You picture yourself pacing the ship's deck at dusk, wrapped in a shawl, the horizon painted orange and violet. The rhythmic roll of the sea beneath your feet is strangely hypnotic. For a moment, you feel drowsy, your body swaying in time with the waves. But then comes the downside, seasickness. The stomach lurches, the head spins, and instead of sleep you find yourself clinging to the rail, muttering, "Better sleepless at home than vomiting abroad." Historians still argue whether these voyages helped at all, or if patients simply return exhausted from travel rather than cured. Land journeys, too, were common prescriptions. Doctors advised train trips into countryside, carriage rides along coastal roads, or extended stays in spa towns like Bath or Harrogate. The idea was simple. Distant from the city, from the smog and stress, might allow rest to return. Families wrote proudly in letters, "Father has gone to the coast for his nerves. We expect him to return sleeping soundly." In reality, Father often came back tan but just as restless, albeit with a suitcase of souvenirs. You roll onto your side. Imagine yourself tucked into a narrow berth on a train, the steady clatter of wheels beneath. The rhythm is hypnotic, yes, but the smoke from the engine seeps through the cracks, and the stiff mattress jolts with every curve. It's not so different from your London bedroom after all, just louder, dirtier, and more expensive. And yet, the ritual of leaving mattered. It wasn't just about the sea or the countryside. It was about escape, removing oneself from the place where insomnia lived, breaking the association between bed and wakefulness. Modern sleep therapists might call it stimulus control. Victorians simply called it taking the sea air. Historians still debate whether these prescriptions were clever intuition or just convenient ways to justify a holiday. You sigh, lying back once more beneath the heavy drapes, the only voyage available to you the one inside your restless imagination. Still, you feel a flicker of kinship with those travelers, pacing ship decks or strolling promenades, hoping that a change of horizon might finally carry them into dreams. The clock ticks. The curtains stir faintly. And you remain exactly where you are, sleepless in your own chamber, wondering perhaps the cure was never in the scenery at all, but in learning how to drift, even when the body refuses. You close your eyes, pretending for a moment you are still swaying on that imagined ship, the horizon rocking you into calm. But then the memory shifts again to another Victorian craze, hypnotism, or what they often called mesmerism. If journeys couldn't quiet the mind, perhaps a gaze could. You imagine yourself seated in a darkened parlor, gaslight dimmed, curtains drawn. Across from you sits a gentleman with an intense stare and a watch dangling from a chain. He speaks slowly, his voice a rhythmic murmur. You are growing heavy. Your eyes cannot stay open. You suppress a laugh, because frankly, your eyes are wide awake. Yet Victorians embraced this ritual with solemn seriousness. The mainstream fact. Mesmerism was popular in the mid-19th century, promoted by figures like James Braid, who believed focus suggestion could calm nerves and cure insomnia. The quirky tidbit? Some practitioners didn't use watches at all but peacock feathers, claiming the shimmer of the eye spots lulled patients more effectively. Imagine dozing off while a stranger waves feathers in front of your face like an overenthusiastic magician. Historians still argue whether these methods truly tapped into subconscious processes, or were simply elaborate performances bolstered by patient expectation. You fix your gaze on the swinging watch, the steady tick in time with the mantel clock. For a moment, the rhythm does feel oddly soothing. Your breath slows, your muscles loosen. But then your mind rebels. What if I sneeze? What if I laugh? What if this is just ridiculous? And just like that, you're jolted back into restlessness. Still awake, the watch still swinging mockingly. Mesmerists claimed remarkable success. Pamphlets promised cures for nervous sleeplessness, melancholia, and disturbances of the spirit. Testimonies filled newspapers. After 20 minutes under gaze, I slept 12 hours straight. Others confessed less glowing results, describing instead a trance-like state, half dream, half wakefulness, neither restful nor restorative. You can imagine patients leaving such sessions dizzy, convinced they were helped, though their eyes still shadowed with fatigue. Doctors debated fiercely. Some hailed mesmerism as groundbreaking. Others dismissed it as charlatanry. The medical journals bristled with argument. Was it suggestion, science, or mere theater? Historians still debate the same question, noting how mesmerism eventually evolved into early forms of hypnosis therapy. Perhaps Victorians were clumsy pioneers, fumbling toward discoveries we now take for granted. You lie back on your bed, eyes closed, imagining the steady swing of that watch above you. Tick sway, tick sway. Your breathing falls into rhythm with it, almost meditative. For a moment, the edges of sleep creep close. But then, inevitably, the thought intrudes, I wonder the mesmerist is staring at me right now. Your eyes snap open, half amused, half unsettled, the illusion broken. The parlor fades, the feathers vanish, and you're left once again in your heavy curtained room. Mesmerism hasn't worked, at least not tonight. But you can't help but smile. There's a certain charm in the idea that Victorians trusted not only tonics and poultices, but also the power of a human gaze to quiet their sleepless nights. The clock ticks steadily on, indifferent to your efforts. Another ritual tried, another cure filed away under maybe tomorrow. You exhale, amused at your own failure, and settle back into the restless dark, still chasing that elusive surrender. The phantom mesmerist fades from your mind, his watch and feathers gone with the candle smoke. You roll onto your side, thinking perhaps the problem is not your mind but your diet. Victorians certainly thought so. They blamed sleeplessness on overindulgence, on indigestion, even on eating the wrong foods at the wrong hour. You recall physicians' warning printed in a household guide. Heavy meats after dusk disturb the humors. The mainstream fact. Medical manuals in the 19th century often prescribed bland, starchy suppers, bread, porridge, or wheat broth, believing such fare soothed the stomach and thus the brain. Beef, cheese, and puddings were considered enemies of repose. You imagine nibbling a dry biscuit at twilight, convinced this crumb of flour holds a key to restful slumber. But Victorians weren't consistent. Some guides urged eating nothing after dusk, claiming an empty stomach guaranteed rest. Others insisted a small snack of warm gruel or oatmeal was essential. Historians still argue whether these contradictions reflected genuine experimentation or simply the endless Victorian urge to moralize daily habits. The quirky tidbit? Certain households promoted celery as a sedative food. Yes, celery, boiled, stewed, or eaten raw with vinegar. It was thought to calm nerves and cool the blood. You picture yourself crunching stalks by candlelight, stringy fibers stuck between your teeth, the flavor more punishment than cure. Yet pamphlets swore by it. Celery taken at supper ensures tranquility of mind and soundness of sleep. You can't help but laugh. Imagine being kept awake not by worry, but by flossing celery fibers from your molars. Then there was gruel, the true star of Victorian bedtime diets. Thin, lukewarm porridge of oats or barley, often sweetened with a bit of treacle. Doctors praised it as easily digested, gently fortifying. You picture yourself spooning bland mush from a bowl, each mouthful robbing life of joy. But perhaps that was the point. Eat something so unexciting that your very soul drifts off out of boredom. You recall diary entries from weary patients. Took gruel before bed, yet lay awake till dawn. Others confess the opposite. One bowl of porridge, and I slept as the dead. The unpredictability made it maddening. Historians still debate whether the effect came from the food itself or simply the warmth of ritual, like the milk you tried earlier. For the wealthy, diets grew stranger still. Some fashionable households experimented with imported foods. Bananas, newly available, praised for their softness. Cocoa, touted as a gentle stimulant, or even sago pudding, thought to soothe delicate stomachs. Imagine chasing insomnia with a bowl of gloopy tapioca, each pearl wobbling on the spoon like a tiny eye staring back at you. You lie back now, imagining the taste of celery, the blandness of porridge, the faint sweetness of treacle. None feels promising. Your stomach grumbles, but not with hunger, with resistance. Perhaps the body knows better than the manuals. Perhaps it refuses to believe that chewing stalks or sipping gruel could quiet centuries of restless minds. Still, you can't help but smile at the earnestness of it all. Every crumb, every spoonful, Every late-night nibble was framed as both cure and moral choice. Eat wisely, and you be rewarded with sleep. Eat foolishly, and you toss till dawn. In the Victorian imagination, even the supper table became a battlefield for your nerves. And so, you close your eyes again, the phantom taste of porridge lingering on your tongue, the celery crunch echoing in your ears. The clock ticks steadily on. Your body remains stubbornly awake, amused and slightly hungry. The imaginary taste of celery still lingers on your tongue, but the stomach isn't fooled. Food and drink have failed. So you wonder. Perhaps rest isn't about eating or drinking at all. Perhaps it's about not moving. This, too, was a Victorian cure. Enforced bed rest, entire days devoted to lying perfectly still. You sink deeper into mattress, imagining yourself under the care of a stern physician who prescribes absolute repose. The mainstream fact, the so-called rest cure, later made infamous by Dr. Silas Ware Mitchell, was widely prescribed for nervous disorders, especially in women. Patients were confined to bed for weeks, forbidden to read, write, or even converse too much. The theory was that overexcited nerves needed total withdrawal from stimulation to reset. At first, it sounds like bliss, an excuse to avoid chores and obligations. But then you imagine it fully. The curtains drawn all day, meals spooned to you, the clock ticking endlessly, your body restless yet forbidden to move. Historians still argue whether this was medicine or simply social control disguised as therapy. The quirky tidbit? Some doctors demanded patients keep detailed diaries of their hours in bed. Yes, even while warning against overuse of the brain. Pages filled with notes like, lay in silence, heart fluttered, no sleep. Ironically, the very act of recording one's insomnia may have made it worse. You picture yourself dutifully jotting each failed nap, your frustration mounting with every entry. The rules grew stranger. Visitors were restricted, stimulation minimized. Patients often lay alone, their only company the muffled sounds of the household outside. Some were forbidden books or embroidery, activities deemed too taxing. Instead, they were left with blank hours, staring at wallpaper patterns until the flowers seemed to shift and crawl. Diaries described visions in the roses, a polite way of admitting hallucinations born of boredom. You try it now, lying perfectly still, refusing to reach for a book, resisting the urge to shift. At first, the silence feels calming, like floating. But soon the stillness turns oppressive. Your legs itch to move, your fingers twitch. The more you try not to stir, the louder your body complains. Perhaps this was a trap. Instead of quieting the nerves, the rest cure amplified every tiny discomfort. Patients reacted differently. Some reported genuine improvement, emerging calmer, more rested. Others spiraled into despair, describing themselves as prisoners in their own bedrooms. The most famous case was writer Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who turned her experience into the haunting story of the yellow wallpaper, a tale of confinement, creeping madness, and walls that seemed to close in. Historians still debate whether the rest cure offered relief to some or harmed far more than it helped. You roll onto your side, restless after only minutes of your imagined confinement. The thought of weeks, months, trapped in bed feels unbearable. Yet Victorians pursued it earnestly, convinced that absolute stillness could coax a stubborn body back into alignment. The clock ticks louder, mocking your failed attempt at rest. Perhaps bed cures weren't meant for insomnia at all, but for control, for forcing the restless body into submission. You stretch your toes beneath the sheets, grateful at least that your rebellion costs nothing but another sleepless hour. The room grows heavy again, curtains press close, the silence thick. You close your eyes, imagining all those Victorians lying still in identical rooms, writing their failures in secret diaries. You feel a strange kinship with them now, exhausted, obedient, yet wide awake, waiting for a sleep that will not come. The imagined confinement still clings to you, the phantom of drawn curtains and endless staring at wallpaper. You stretch your limbs defiantly, deciding that if lying perfectly still won't bring sleep, perhaps the opposite, movement, might. Victorians certainly thought so, but they were fascinated by calisthenics, gentle exercises, and curious contraptions meant to shake the body into rest. You picture yourself in a drawing room converted to a gymnasium, Sunlight muted through lace curtains, polished wooden floors gleaming. A physician demonstrates a series of slow, deliberate stretches, raising arms, bending at the waist, rolling shoulders. The mainstream fact: light evening exercise was prescribed by some doctors to release nervous tension, but it had to be measured and moderate. Too much exertion was believed to overstimulate, causing wakefulness instead of sleep. Balance, as always, was an impossible goal. The quirky tidbit? Some households purchased mechanical rocking beds, frames that swayed gently when cranked, mimicking the motion of a cradle. Advertisements promised they would lull even the most restless adult. Imagine lying on one, the slow sway tugging you toward calm, until the squeak of the crank ruined the illusion. Historians still argue whether these devices were true medical innovations or just eccentric novelties for wealthy insomniacs. Others experimented with vibrating chairs, hand-cranked by servants or powered by weighted mechanisms. The theory was that rhythmic motion soothed nerves and realigned the body's energy. You smirk at the thought. It's basically the Victorian precursor to today's massage chairs, only noisier, heavier, and more likely to pinch a finger. You rise from bed, stretching your arms as instructed. The motions are simple: a few bends, a twist of the torso, a shake of the legs. At first, it feels good, blood moving sluggishly through stiff muscles. Perhaps there's something in it. The body loosening, the mind distracted. But soon the effort wakes you further, heart beating faster, thoughts sharper. You flop back into bed with a sigh, more awake than before. Manuals warned against this. One guide solemnly declared, if exercise before rest invigorates, it is worse than poison. And yet, families persisted, convinced that a few calisthenics might unlock slumber. Diaries record the results with maddening inconsistency. 10 stretches, and I slept promptly versus attempted my routine, found myself restless until dawn. Historians still debate whether success depended on physiology, psychology, or sheer coincidence. You imagine those Victorian homes, servants peeking curiously as their masters bent and twisted in nightshirts, convinced they were performing science. Some laughed at the absurdity. Others embraced it earnestly. In the end, what mattered wasn't the exercise itself, but the ritual, the attempt, the hope, the nightly belief that action could force the body into stillness. You settle back under the sheets, limbs warm, breath uneven. Perhaps the rocking bed would have helped, you think, though the squeaking crank would likely have kept you awake instead. Another hour slips by, the clock ticking smugly on the mantel. You close your eyes, half amused, half weary. One more cure tested and filed away under the long catalog of Victorian insomnia. The imaginary rocking bed fades from your thoughts, its squeaky crank echoing faintly in your mind. Back beneath the covers, you glance at the small stack of papers on the nightstand. Pamphlets, advertisements, letters sent by post. For Victorians, insomnia was not just a private struggle. It was a marketplace. If tonics and mustard poultices failed, there was always the latest quack remedy hawked by ambitious inventors. You flip through a pamphlet printed on cheap paper, the ink smudging slightly beneath your thumb. The patent Somno helmet, guaranteed slumber in 10 minutes. It boasts in ornate fonts. The image shows a man wearing a bulbous contraption strapped to his head, tubes snaking outward like some mechanical octopus. The mainstream fact: the 19th century was a golden age of patent medicine and bizarre inventions, many marketed directly to insomniacs desperate for relief. From vibrating chairs and magnetic belts, gadgets flooded the market, each promising to outwit the restless brain. The quirky tidbit? One had described a sleep-inducing whistle, to be placed between the lips. Blowing it slowly was said to regulate breathing and calm nerves. Imagine lying in bed, whistling softly into a tube while your spouse looks on in horror. Diaries mention households trying such devices in earnest, though more often than not they produce laughter instead of slumber. Historians still argue whether these inventions were clever psychological tricks or simply scams wrapped in brass and velvet. You pick up another pamphlet, Dr. Bransom's vibratory recliner. The drawing shows a chaise lounge mounted on springs, rocked violently by hidden mechanisms. Patients were to strap themselves in, crank a handle, and allow the rhythmic agitation to induce repose. You imagine the racket of gears and squeaks filling the bedroom, the operator wide awake from sheer noise. Still, hopeful buyers order them by post, eager to trust any cure advertised in bold italics. Not all were so mechanical. Some pamphlets promised herbal pills for repose, little more than sugar pellets with lavender oil. Others offered sleeping powders laced with questionable ingredients, chloral hydrate, bromides, or plain chalk. You can almost hear the sales pitch. One dose before bed and you will awake refreshed, vigorous, and morally upright. The language sold not just sleep, but virtue itself. You lie back, pamphlet resting on your chest, amused at the absurdity. And yet, you understand the appeal. After all, you too are here, sleepless, half tempted by anything that offers hope. Perhaps if a vibratory recliner appeared at your door, you'd give it a try. Desperation in the quiet hours makes fools of everyone. The mail-order craze thrived on this desperation. Housewives wrote to companies for trial samples. Young clerks saved wages to buy belts or helmets. And even doctors sometimes endorsed products they scarcely believed in. Historians still debate whether this was exploitation or simply the inevitable result of a society obsessed with progress. Either way, it left behind a curious paper trail of promises that rarely match reality. You fold the pamphlets neatly, place them back on the nightstand, and blow out a soft sigh. Another hour has passed. Another ritual tried in imagination. Quack cures, gadgets, powders, all part of the Victorian theater of sleeplessness. You smile faintly in the dark, muttering, "Maybe tomorrow I'll order the helmet," before rolling back under the covers, wide awake still, but at least entertained. The stack of pamphlets sits untouched now, their promises fading like the candle smoke. You stare at the ceiling, knowing that Victorians, when all else failed, sometimes turned not to gadgets or gruel, but to conversation itself. If the mind refused silence, perhaps it needed a gentle story, a voice to keep it company until dreams arrived. You imagine a servant seated quietly by the bed, or a family member perched in a nearby chair, speaking in low tones. The mainstream fact. Victorians often believed soft conversation at bedtime could distract a restless brain from its worries. Not fiery debates, not gossip, but gentle tales, memories from the day, retellings of Bible stories, or descriptions of the countryside. Physicians called it soothing discourse, as if small talk itself might act as a sedative. The quirky tidbit? Professional storytellers sometimes advertise their services in urban papers, offering to visit households and read aloud until patients drifted off. Imagine hiring someone to sit at your bedside and murmur passages about farming, commerce, or even parliamentary debates until your eyelids closed. Historians still argue whether these figures were true professionals or simply family friends repackaged as a kind of informal therapy. You picture yourself now, eyes half closed, listening as a soft voice recounts the details of a trip to the seaside. The rhythm of the words is calming, not because the content is riveting, but because it isn't. It's pleasantly dull, the kind of detail that bores the conscious mind just enough to loosen its grip. Your breathing slows as the story meanders. Gulls on the pier, waves licking the sand, the price of oysters in the market. None of it matters, and that's exactly why it works. But the risk, of course, was too much stimulation. If the voice grew animated or the tale too exciting, the patient's brain snapped back to wakefulness. One diary records, "Aunt read to me of pirates," which produced the opposite effect, visions all night long. Another noted, "The conversation soothed me until the clock struck and reminded me of my duties," whereupon I lay awake again. Historians still debate whether this bedtime storytelling was closer to therapy or just another family ritual dressed in medical justification. You roll onto your side, speaking softly to yourself in the dark, as if pretending someone else is there. You murmur the details of your day. The squeak of the floorboard, the scratch of the quill, the faint smell of lavender sachets. As the words flow, your mind drifts. It feels less like thought, more like narration, a slow unraveling of the day. For a fleeting moment, your eyelids flutter heavier, and then the quiet returns, leaving you awake once more. You smirk faintly, realizing you become your own Victorian storyteller, lulling yourself with the most mundane details you can muster. Perhaps that was always the secret. Not grand cures or elaborate devices, but simply talking yourself into forgetting you were awake. The room is silent again, save for the steady tick of the clock. You close your eyes, whispering one last phrase into the darkness. And so the story ends, and I drift away. But, of course, you don't, at least not yet. The phantom storyteller's voice fades, leaving only the stubborn tick of the mantel clock. You sigh, pulling the blankets higher, and wonder perhaps the problem isn't the remedies themselves, but your very environment. Victorians thought the same, and so they invented another ritual, rearranging the bedroom, as if shifting a chair or moving the bed might coax sleep from hiding. You rise and picture yourself dragging the heavy oak frame across the creaking floorboards. The mainstream fact. Medical manuals of the late 19th century often advised specific placements for furniture to promote sleep. Beds were not to face mirrors, lest reflections disturb the mind. They should not align with doorways, lest drafts sneak in, and certainly not beneath windows, lest moonlight stir the nerves. The very geometry of a room became medical prescription. The quirky tidbit? Some guide suggested placing potted plants near the bed to purify the air. A charming thought, until one realizes that Victorians also believed plants stole oxygen at night. Families argued over whether geraniums lulled or strangled the sleeper. Historians still debate whether this debate reflected genuine scientific confusion or simply another layer of domestic superstition. You push the chair closer to the fireplace, rearrange the rug, smooth the curtains. The room feels no different, yet the ritual itself offers a strange comfort. Perhaps the mere act of doing something was the cure. One diary entry reads, "Shifted bed from south to west. Sleep did not come, though the view seemed improved." Another, more optimistic, wrote, "Rearranged the furniture and at last slept an hour without waking." Color, too, came under scrutiny. Some physicians claimed that pale green wallpaper soothed nerves, while deep red agitated them. Others urged simplicity. No heavy patterns, lest a restless brain fixate on swirls. You glance at your own wallpaper, its ivy and rose motif twisting faintly in the candlelight. Do the vines calm you, or do they crawl in your imagination? Tonight, it feels like both. You lie back down, bed angled now toward the north wall, and wait. Does it feel different? Perhaps slightly. The draft is less, the moonlight softer, or perhaps it is all in your head. Historians still argue whether such changes were rooted in early environmental psychology or mere Victorian fussiness. Either way, countless households rearranged bedrooms by candlelight, chasing the hope of a better night. For some, the ritual grew elaborate. Whole families debated furniture placement, like generals planning campaigns. Turn the bed there. Shift the table here. Remove that picture. Its gaze is unsettling. Sleep became not just personal but communal, a family project to outweep the dark. You imagine a household shuffling furniture late at night, servants sighing as beds scrape floors, all in the name of one person's elusive rest. Back in your own room, the bed rests against a new wall, the air marginally cooler. You tuck yourself in again, smiling faintly at the absurdity. Perhaps the cure was never about the placement itself, but about hope. The reassurance that you hadn't surrendered, that tomorrow night might be different. The clock ticks on, unimpressed by your efforts. The ivy wallpaper sways faintly in shadow. And you, wide awake still, lie there in a room freshly rearranged, waiting for sleep that refuses to be bribed by geometry. The bed rests stubbornly against its new wall, but the geometry brings no more sleep than before. You sigh, sinking into the pillow, when another cure creeps back from the pages of pamphlets and diaries. Writing. If the mind refused silence, Victorians often try to pour it out onto paper, believing ink could siphon away wakefulness. You picture yourself fumbling for a quill, the inkpot cold and slightly clotted from neglect. By the candle's flicker, you open a diary bound in worn leather. The mainstream fact. Victorians embraced journaling as both moral duty and medical exercise. Write out your thoughts before bed. Guides urged, and you'll unburden the mind. It was the era of endless diaries, filled not only with major events, but with the tiniest notations. Whether meals, even the number of times one stirred restlessly at night. The quirky tidbit? Some manuals recommended keeping a dream ledger, a book to record visions upon waking, in hopes of taming them. Patients jotted down fragments. Chased by geese, spoke with Queen Victoria, could not find shoes. The act was thought to organize the subconscious, to drain it of power. Historians still argue whether such ledgers were proto-psychology or simply another Victorian love of cataloging. You dipped the quill, scratching onto the page, unable to rest. Tried warm milk, mustard, prayers. No result. The act feels both calming and absurd. Each word carries your frustration. Yet the sound of quill against paper is soothing in itself. A faint rhythm like rain against glass. Perhaps that's what doctors hoped. That routine, not revelation, might lull the restless. But of course, the danger was stimulation. Some diarists admitted that once they began writing, they couldn't stop. Sleepless nights filled with page after page of grievances, memories, and half-baked ideas. One letter writer confessed, "I wrote until dawn, convinced I had discovered a cure, only collapsed at sunrise, utterly spent." You smirk. Realizing insomnia cured by sheer exhaustion isn't much of a victory. Still, the ritual became deeply personal. Diaries were companions, confidants, silent witnesses to sleeplessness. In their pages, insomnia transformed from private misery into narrative. Patients felt less alone knowing their struggles had been captured, even if only in ink. Historians still debate whether the true benefit was medical or merely emotional. You close the diary softly, blotting the page with a sand shaker. The candle sputters lower. Your eyelids droop slightly, the quill's rhythm echoing faintly in your head. Perhaps you will drift off now, soothed by the act of confession. But then, inevitably, the mantel clock chimes again, dragging you back to wakefulness. You chuckle under your breath. Even ink cannot cage insomnia. Still, the page holds your words, proof that the night was not entirely wasted. And perhaps tomorrow, when daylight filters through the curtains, you'll look back on the scribbles and smile at the absurd parade of cures tried in vain. For now, though, the room is quiet again, diary closed, candle dimming. You roll onto your side, breath slow, waiting, always waiting, for the sleep that hides just out of reach. The diary rests shut on a nightstand, its pages holding yet another confession of wakefulness. You lie back, the quill scratch still echoing faintly in memory, and realize you have exhausted nearly every Victorian remedy: milk, mustard, magnets, posture, prayers. And yet, the room remains heavy, the clock ticks steady, and sleep continues its stubborn absence. This was a truth Victorians knew all too well. Sometimes, despite all rituals, insomnia lingered. Doctors grew philosophical, writing essays on the inherent mystery of slumber. Patients resigned themselves, whispering, "If sleep will not come, at least I will wait with dignity." The mainstream fact: insomnia was recognized as one of the most persistent, least curable afflictions of the age, recorded in medical journals as the shadow companion of modern progress. The quirky tidbit? Some guides even suggested surrender. If sleep would not come, rise and write letters, darn stockings, or pace until dawn. Better industry than idleness, one manual declared, turning even sleeplessness into moral instruction. Historians still argue whether this advice was pragmatic acceptance or just more Victorian moralizing. You close your eyes, recalling the procession of cures you've tried: the warm milk, the perfumed cloth, the magnetic belts, all piling up like props in some elaborate bedtime play. Each absurd, each earnest, each born from the same hope, that sleep might be coaxed, tricked, or bribed. You smile faintly, realizing that in their endless striving, Victorians weren't so different from you. Still awake, still searching, still whispering promises to themselves in the dark. The mantel clock ticks slower now, or perhaps your mind has softened enough not to notice. Your body sinks into the mattress, no longer resisting, no longer striving. Perhaps this, at last, is a cure. Not the mustard poultice or the rocking bed, but the quiet surrender of simply being here, breathing, waiting. And so, the long night fades into twilight. The dark softens into pale gray, and your eyelids grow heavier with each passing moment. The rituals have failed, yet somehow, Through the sheer passage of time, you feel yourself drifting closer to the edge. The room quiets now, its edges blurred, the furniture fading into shadow. Your breath slows, each inhale longer, each exhale softer, as though the body itself has finally grown tired of its restlessness. The mantel clock still ticks, but its sound is gentled, no longer a tyrant, only a faint companion in the hush. You think of the Victorians, of warm milk and seaweed mattresses, of lavender sachets and vibrating chairs, of diaries filled with midnight confessions. They, too, lay awake through long hours, trying one cure after another, their minds as stubborn as yours. Yet even they found, eventually, that sleep cannot be commanded, only invited. So you let go. You allow the body to sink, the limbs to grow heavy, the breath to settle into rhythm. The failures of the night no longer matter. The cures, the experiments, the odd contraptions, all drift away like smoke from a candle's wick. What remains is only this: stillness, softness, the quiet reassurance that the night will not last forever. Outside the window, dawn stirs faintly, but you needn't notice it. The world can wait. Here, now, there's nothing to do, nowhere to go. The bed holds you, the darkness covers you, and the stories you've heard tonight circle gently, like waves retreating from the shore. Let them carry you. Let the absurdity, the hope, the persistence of those long-gone Victorians fade into a background hum, no sharper than the whisper of your own breath. You are safe, you are warm, and the weight of the day has already slipped far behind. Now close your eyes fully. Let the thoughts thin. Let the silence deepen. Sleep is here, waiting to take you, as it has taken countless restless souls before.